Oh, look, they all muted themselves. How cute. Well, hi, I'm Richard. I'm a seminarian. I know the caller is confusing. Um, I'm in my last 4 years of study at seminary. So I'm in the seminary in the US is typically 8 or 9 years. I'm doing it in 6. I can do finger math, right? I'm doing it in 6, and I just completed 4. Wait, 6. And I just completed 4. There we are. So I have 2 left. Abby's laughing at me, which is cool because I'm just a normal person. So I get to wear this, which is very nice. It feels like being a little kid playing dress up and wearing your dad's clothes. Well, if you wanted to be your dad when you were a little kid, that's the way it feels. My dad is not a priest. Don't worry about that. That's a whole different subject, whole different concern. If you're worried about that, ask Deepa. She's really smart. She knows these things. But I grew up a normal kid from a normal family, just kind of like everybody else. My dad was in the Army, so I guess not totally like everybody else. We moved a lot, and every couple of years we moved to a different house, into another city, sometimes different countries. But there wasn't anything really special or different about me growing up. Here's a picture of me, a baby picture of me, as proof, just like everyone else. Every other little kid did that, right? Isn't that cute, right? I never stopped being cute. But that's funny. You can actually laugh at that. But I put that up only because it's really funny. After I decided that the seminary thing was worth giving a shot to, my aunt found that picture and posted it on the internet. I never knew that existed. And in part because growing up, my family never went to Mass. I was baptized, and I remember my first communion, and I eventually got my confirmation as a high schooler. But I don't remember going to Mass except for my first communion. As a matter of fact, I remember not going to Mass before my first communion. I remember being really scared and thinking the priest was going to be furious with me because I wasn't going to the classes for the first communion. My mom legitimately dressed me up real nice, pushed me in the back of the line, and just said, do what all the other little kids do. Don't do that. Don't ever do that. But, we didn't go to Mass. We didn't go to Mass before. We weren't active Catholics after my first communion. We didn't become active again until kind of high school when I finally got my confirmation. And, things were just kind of normal. I was a normal guy. I played sports and, had girlfriends and hung out with my friends and stayed up way too late and then couldn't get up in the morning and forgot to do my homework sometimes. And normal. Eventually, I became a youth minister. That was after being confirmed. And basically, I didn't want to do it. The priest asked me, and I was really scared. I don't know why. My whole life I was scared of priests. Now I'm going to be one. Be scared of myself. When I look in the mirror, I'm just going to start screaming. Like, yeah! Anyway, I'll never take another selfie because I'll be scared. But I was super scared. I was sure I did something wrong. He asked me to be the youth minister. I was so relieved. I was so so relaxed and happy that I wasn't in trouble that I said yes. And that's how I became a youth minister. And so I was a youth minister for a long time. And that's really important because God actually used my being a youth minister. He used young people like you to show me my vocation, to show me what he wanted for my life. To say that shortly, I actually was helping run a Steubenville conference. And I was doing a lot for this Steubenville conference, which was really frustrating me. And then at the last minute, if you've ever heard of the LEAD program for Steubenville, if you haven't talked to Deepa at some point, she'll tell you about it, right? But there was a LEAD program. Abby knows. Talk to Abby, she knows. And during lead week, it's kind of like a week retreat before Steubenville for high school juniors and seniors. If you're looking at doing it, you think like that would be cool, go for it. Trust me, it's worth it. Talk to Abby, she knows. Well, that retreat, like at the last minute, the woman who was supposed to like set everything up for the retreat couldn't do it. She just bailed. And so they called me and they were like, hey, Rich, I wasn't a seminarian yet. So, hey, Rich, could you do it? And I was like, well, what do you want me to do? And basically they were like, we want you to be the retreat mom. We want you to make food and drop it off and pick people up at the airport and be friendly and happy. And I was like, I'm not a mom. Does this face say mom? What's funny is everybody from that week calls me mom now. So I'm still in contact with some of the people who are, they're all in college and some of them are getting married now. And they all call me mom or Mama Richard, which is weird. Because I was a retreat mom for a weekend. Well, one night they wanted to do Eucharistic adoration, they wanted to do adoration, and they wanted to have confessions at the same time. And I had permission. I could expose the Blessed Sacrament. We could have adoration. But confessions, I couldn't hear confessions. And so I started calling all the priests I knew, asking them and begging them to hear confessions. And they all said no, because it was last minute and they were busy. And so I got like 4 or 5 priests to hear confessions. And I promised them, I was like, at 8 o'clock, I promise you'll be done. You can go home. I won't keep you past 8 o'clock. And so adoration is going on and I'm kind of in the middle of the aisle, right? And there are pews on this side and there are pews on this side. And I'm right here in the middle of the Blessed Sacrament. Jesus is right here on the altar. And I'm kind of directing traffic and telling people, okay, this priest is available. You can go there for confession. This priest is over there. You can go to confession. Meanwhile, people are kind of lining up, like they're getting anxious. They really want to go to confession. And so, I'm standing there directing traffic and kind of looking at Jesus and praying with the music and, busy. And, I feel like, a cop and, in a movie or in, the Philippines or something. I'm like, but, I'm sort of praying. And then I looked at my watch and realized there's 15 minutes left, 7:45. I promised the priest they could leave at 8. And I looked at the lines and there were so many people who hadn't gone to confession that wanted to go. And I got a little I hate to say it, but I got a little frustrated with God. And so I kind of, found myself praying a little bit. It was like, Lord, why didn't you make this go faster? Why don't you do a miracle? You can do that, right? Like, why didn't you give me more priests? Why didn't you bring teenagers who weren't such terrible sinners so they would have gone faster? Right? Like something. And then I look and there's a young man, he was a senior in high school, and he looked at his watch and realized that it was 10 minutes till now. I'd been praying furiously for 5 minutes for a miracle. And he looked at his watch and he looked over and saw how many people were ahead of him in line. And he got out of the line, sat in the pew, and started crying. He was so upset. He was so heartbroken that he couldn't go to confession. He actually cried. And when that happened, I got so upset. I mean, I was really upset. I looked at Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament. I looked at the Blessed Sacrament on the altar. And it was like, that moment when someone is bothering you and they're pestering you, you're trying to ignore them and act like, they're not really talking. Maybe like you're doing to me right now. Right? Or they're talking, and you're like, I don't hear you. What was one of those moments? I looked at the Blessed Sacrament as if there was a conversation that was going on for a long time that I was ignoring. And I found myself, I looked at him and I said, okay, fine, that's it. Fine, I quit. I'll do whatever you want. I just want to help. I'll go be a priest. And then I sat down in the pew because I never thought that I'd say that. I never thought that I'd want that in my life. I never thought that was something going on. And so I kind of sat in the pew on the opposite side of the young man who was crying because he wanted to go to confession. And then I started crying because I was going to be a priest. Two dudes, one pew, both crying. Awesome. But, you know, it's important, I think, to recognize in that moment who Jesus actually is. You know, everything in life becomes clear, becomes understandable. We can recognize what's going on. We can navigate these things the better we know Jesus. Once we know Jesus, things become clearer. The more we know him, the more clear they become. You know, because it's Jesus who spoke to outcast people who, you know, nobody would talk to. It's Jesus who gave women and children equal dignity to men. It's Jesus who healed people. It's Jesus who walked on the sea and who controlled weather. And it's Jesus who gave people access to heaven through a relationship with himself. And it's that same Jesus that we can know today. It's that same Jesus who wants to do those same things today. And to do that, most of the time, what he does is he calls men from the common priesthood to the sacramental priesthood. Now, if I understand correctly, I hope you heard about the common priesthood, right? Like sometimes known as the priesthood of believers or the priesthood of the faithful. There are lots of terms for it. But basically what it means is that when you're baptized into the Munera Christi, the three offices of Jesus, all right? So priest, prophet, and king, or queen. Go ahead, get your tiaras. But so the regular everyday person who's baptized has this priestly office. Well, that same Jesus takes men from that section, from that part of the world, right? So now you have the whole world, right? You have the whole world, and then you have the baptized, and then from there, Jesus elects. He pulls specific people to something different. And those people have two vocations. I can't hear you, Deepa. Okay. Those people have two vocations, which is funny because, you know, if you're here and you're listening to me and you're thinking, you know, I want to be married, right? Everybody has that vocation. It's the natural vocation. You have that vocation. It's the vocation of everyone. Some people are given, very few people are given a second vocation. It's a supernatural vocation that sits on top of and above that natural vocation, right? So it's supernatural. It's okay, Michael. It's a supernatural vocation that sits on top of and above that natural vocation, which means anyone who's ever been called to be a priest by Jesus has that same vocation and has wanted to have a family, has wanted to have a girlfriend, wanted to have a wife. That never goes away. It's a natural vocation of all of us. But some guys get called out of that and are given the ability to live a supernatural vocation. And God uses normal people. He uses guys like me who like to travel, guys who have ridden bulls. Yes, I've ridden bulls. Guys who like to spend time with friends. I don't look like a bull rider, right? But guys who, at the same time, I always wanted to be more than I was. No lie, growing up, I always told people I'd be the king of the world. I always wanted to be more than I was. I always had dreams of being something greater. And I think that's the secret. Like, I always felt like There was something more for me. And you can be called for something more, something unique, because it's Jesus who calls us to that. The same Jesus who loves us, the very same Jesus who loved us into existence. He gives us a purpose for our lives and calls us to something great. Now, you saw me do this thing, right? Like right? The natural, the supernatural. I want to point out that this supernatural isn't better. I had a friend once call me. He's married now, he has kids. He called me very upset with me. Why didn't you ever tell me that I was giving up the best for good? And that's not the case. That's not it at all. The supernatural priesthood is better for some people, better for the people that God has asked to do that. But it's not better. I know lots of people who, if they were priests, would be making terrible decisions. Maybe you've heard of priests who have made bad decisions in the past. Probably because they weren't supposed to be priests. Becoming what you're meant to be, that's always the best. That's always better than any other alternative. And so a little bit about a priest, a priest he's changed. On his ordination, he's changed. There's something different about him. And that change allows him to live, we say, in persona Christi, in the person of Christ, right? And so it's that same body of Christ that becomes present so that we can touch him, so that we can see him, so we can feel him. In the bodily person of the priest, through the sacraments, we can see Jesus, we touch Jesus and are touched by him, we feel Jesus. We become like every person in the Gospels who met Jesus and spoke to him. And we find ourselves being healed by him. We find our lives being changed by him. We find moments, events in our lives where everything is different, everything is changed because of Jesus, because of the power of God in that moment. Now, the word body doesn't express all that a person is. It only describes what can be seen. So you have a body and a soul. And it isn't the body of a priest that's made like Jesus. That's why you have seminarians like me who are in pretty good shape, and you have priests who, some of them are in good shape and some of them are in shape. But it's not his body that's made like Jesus, it's his soul. He receives a new character. Now, you may have heard the word indelible mark, or the phrase indelible mark, or mark. Mark is a good word. I think the word character is a better word, because the letters, any letter in any alphabet is called a character, right? And it's something that is imprinted on. That's what a character is. It's something that's imprinted on something. So you and I have a character, and we can grow in our character or not. We can imprint a good character on ourselves, and we can have a good character imprinted on ourselves. When we type, we imprint characters onto the screen and onto the paper. And so I like the use of the word character better, because what happens is, at ordination, the man receives a new character. Something else is imprinted on his soul that wasn't there before. And it can't be removed, can't be erased. A guy who gets ordained a priest, and then if something happens and he stops being a priest, he stops living a priestly life. Maybe he gets 90 years old and he doesn't have the muscles to lift his arms high enough to celebrate Mass. His priesthood doesn't go away. He's still a priest. Which is important for us to recognize, that the call and the invitation that God gives us isn't just for something that's useful. God doesn't call us to be useful, to be able to just do something. God calls us to be something. Jesus calls us to be someone. And that someone is always found in relationship to Jesus. It's never separated from Jesus. Any relationship, any character that's separated from Jesus is going to lead you away from Jesus. That makes it simple. And so 2 years, I'll be a priest. And there'll be a new character. Yeah, God willing. They always say, God willing. Well, we know that God wills it at this point. If I don't become a priest, it's because somebody else didn't will it. But at that point, I'll get a new character on my soul. I'll be changed. I'll never be the same. Well, my soul will never be the same. I'll still be me. You know, I'll get to live my life like Jesus, because in a special way, Jesus will be present in me. It doesn't mean that everything I do is going to be perfect. Like, being in persona Christi doesn't mean that like all of a sudden like I am the living embodiment of Jesus, because it's not my body that's like Jesus, it's the soul. And so I can still ride bulls if I want. I can still trip and fall. I can still mess up. Still be totally imperfect and hurt people's feelings and offend people. And we hope that doesn't happen, but we know life sometimes causes that. But I get to live my life becoming something else, becoming something new, something better. You know, the goal of a priest's life is to get people into heaven. And if you ask me, that's incredible. Like, the goal of a priest's life is to get you into heaven. The goal of a priest's life is to get me into heaven. Much more difficult for them to get me into heaven than you, I promise. Much more work right here. But you know, the goal of a married person is to get people into heaven. And that's incredible. The goal of life is to get people into heaven. Get everyone in heaven if we can. I want to be a priest because I believe God made me for it. And you know, that brings me to one last point, which is it's not something I ever wanted. And I kind of think that if I did want it, it was something I always wanted, I probably shouldn't be a priest. Because like I said in the beginning, it's something God calls you to, that Jesus invites you into. It's something special. It's a special relationship with him that's different. It's not about power. It's not about authority. It's not about fame or wealth. It's about a relationship with Jesus. And he calls us to a very special, different relationship. And if I lived my life always wanting to be a priest, then I would bet that I probably wasn't just wanting a different special relationship with Jesus. I probably wanted something else. You know, before I was born, before any of us were born, God had a dream. He had a dream for my life. He had a dream for your life. And what's funny is when he had that dream for your life, he said yes. Did you ever have a great idea and think, yes, that's it? Maybe you were working on something, maybe you were trying to make your house and you didn't know what to do, and then all of a sudden, like, in your mind, it made sense. You're like, yes, that's what I need. And you got tape because, you know, licking forks didn't make them stick. When God thought about the world and he dreamt about what would it take to make this world the way I want it, the way it should be? What would make this world more perfect? You were what made him say yes. He dreamed of you and said, yes, that's it. the beauty is that we have the opportunity. Nobody has to do it. We have the opportunity to say yes to God. We can say yes to his dream. We can say no. We have the freedom. Michael, I know lots of people want you to be a priest. I already see it. It's okay. The question is, does God want you to be a priest? And if he does, will you say yes? Don't answer that right now. But that's really the way it works. And when we look at the rest of us, Deepa, is God asking her and inviting her to be a married woman? And if so, will Deepa say yes? You see how it works? I'd ask you to do one thing for me. And that one thing is to first find out what it is that God wants. Find out God's dream for you. You'll know because people will tell you things. I found lots of people telling me to be a priest when I didn't think that was a possibility. I also found that I like talking to people, and I like caring for people, and I actually like praying. And so it makes sense. Find out what God wants, and then be brave enough to say yes. Whatever God calls you to, especially if he's calling you to be a priest, but whatever he calls you to, it takes bravery to do it. He's not calling you to do something because it's easy and what everybody else does. Now, I think you're going into small groups next.